This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at clones. In Magic, clone is most often used to refer to a creature that can enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature that's in play. This can be quite powerful, as you often copy something that is worth way more than the mana you spend to cast a clone. At the very least, a clone tends to give you a copy of the best creature on the battlefield, and that's pretty nice. The name comes from the original card that did this, Clone, which is an alpha, which means it's as old as the game of Magic itself. For the purposes of this video, I did expand the definition a little bit beyond that, to include any card that can make a copy of a creature, whether it is in play or in the graveyard. In other words, this list isn't only limited to creatures who enter as a copy of something, this list also includes other types of cards that can do it too. The card does have to be able to make a copy of a creature though, so things that copy only artifacts or only enchantments aren't included, even if sometimes you can make a copy of an enchantment creature or an artifact creature. It just isn't cloney enough if the card isn't capable of entering or making a copy of pretty much any creature. Obviously, this also excludes cards that only copy themselves and other similar effects. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's dive into the list. At number 10, it is the original Clone. It's pretty cool for this card to actually show up on this list since this effect is named for it. So yeah, Clone is a 4-mana creature that can enter the battlefield as a copy of any other creature on it. Clone made its competitive debut at Magic's very first major competitive event, the 1994 World Championship. It's been reprinted a lot over the years, and has managed to see additional play in later standard formats too, including in Lorwyn Standard where it was played in Revelark decks. While in the graveyard, the Clone has 0 power, so it can be brought back to the battlefield by Revelark. And this is especially spicy because this deck had a bunch of creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, so you'd probably bring back one of those, plus the Clone, and get 2 triggers, which was pretty great. From 2011 to 2013, it was played as a sideboard card in a variety of blue-white control decks in Standard, but it hasn't gained any points since 2013, and as we'll see on this list, there's been enough Clone power creep over the years that Clone is fairly unlikely to gain more points in the future, though I guess a Standard legal reprint at the right time might help it a little bit. But hey, the cards on it will always be considered clones because of this clone. At number 9, it is Saheeli Rai. As I noted in the introduction, I ultimately decided to include cards that can make token copies of things, as this is close enough to a clone effect to me, even when the token is temporary, as is the case for Saheeli's -2 ability. She gained all of her points in the Standard of 2017, where she famously teamed up with Felidar Guardian to create a turn 4 combo that immediately won the game. You would play the Guardian on turn 4, and then use Saheeli's -2 to copy the Guardian, at which point you'd get the new copy, which would then blink Saheeli, allowing her to use her -2 again, and you would do this until you had lethal damage. This combo infamously went unnoticed by Magic R&D, and it resulted in the Guardian getting banned out of the format pretty quickly, as the deck was simply too good and too consistent for the format. So far, Saheeli hasn't gained points in other formats. At number 8, it is Glasspool Mimic. This 3-mana clone isn't quite as powerful as the original one, as it can only copy creatures on your side of the battlefield. However, it makes up for that in a couple of different ways. It costs 1 mana less, and it's a modal double-faced card with a land on the other side. Clones can definitely end up stuck in your hand sometimes because you just don't have something worth copying, so the fact that this can come into play tapped as a land is great upside, since you still have the awesome ceiling of this copying something amazing, with none of the downside most other clones have. This type of modality makes the card pretty attractive in a wide variety of decks in multiple formats. Pioneer is where it's done the most work, seeing play in decks as varied as Fires of Invention and Spirit Aggro. Clones in general can be pretty spicy in tribal decks, as they can effectively provide additional copies of your powerful lords, like Supreme Phantom in Spirit decks. The Mimic has also seen play in a similar capacity in Legacy Merfolk. It looks very well positioned to gain more points in the future. At number 7, it is Vesuvan Shapeshifter. This 5-mana clone is more expensive than most of the good clones out there, but it comes with some interesting upside. It has Morph, which means you can play it face down as a 3-mana 2/2. Then, if you pay its Morph cost for 1 generic and a blue to turn it face up, it becomes a copy of any creature on the battlefield. So you still pay 5 mana total, but you do it as an installment plan across 2 turns. More importantly, it can also turn back face down during your upkeep, allowing you to clone something else if there's a better option. The sweetest thing about the Shapeshifter is its ability to copy other Morph creatures, which can allow you to abuse their turn face up ability. This was most famously accomplished in both block and standard alongside Brine Elemental. The Elemental makes your opponent skip their untap step when it turns face up. So if you turn your Shapeshifter face up and copy Brine Elemental, you get to rebuy that ability every single turn, which is a pretty powerful way to lock your opponent out of the game. While this was certainly the sweetest thing the Shapeshifter could do, it was also played in lots of other blue decks in both formats where it didn't really have any special synergy, it was just a nice reusable clone. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of standard. At number 6 it is Vizier of Many Faces. This clone costs 4, like the original, but it is a little harder to cast because it costs double blue. It more than makes up for that though because it has Embalm. This means you can pay 3 generic and 2 blue and exile it from your graveyard to put a copy of the Vizier into play, which means you get to clone something else after it dies, usually netting you a 2-for-1. It gained most of its points in Standard, it was played in the main deck of some decks like Temur Energy, but it saw more sideboard play, partly because the format had a couple of difficult to kill creatures. For example, it was great for copying the Hexproof Carnage Tyrant or the recursive the Scarab God, as getting your own copy of those cards was pretty much the only way you could effectively combat them. So far, since rotating out of Standard, it has only gained a single point and it came in Pioneer, so it may slip down this list in the long run. At number 5, I've included 2 cards, Splinter Twin and Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. These 2 cards have almost the same score, have a similar effect, and their fates are also very much tied to one another. Both of them have the red version of the clone effect, which generally makes a token copy with haste that gets sacrificed at the end of the turn. Splinter Twin was a primary win condition for a combo deck built around it in both Standard and Modern. If you put Splinter Twin on something like Deceiver Exarch, you can then tap the Exarch to make a copy of itself, then use the new Exarch's Enter the Battlefield trigger to untap the Exarch that has Splinter Twin on it, and you can do this until you have lethal damage. Ultimately, this combo was banned out of Modern in 2016. Meanwhile, Kiki-Jiki has also gained most of its points in Modern. During the Splinter Twin days, it was sometimes played alongside the Aura, since it could do the exact same combo with Deceiver Exarch. But because it cost more mana, it wasn't really the focal point of the deck. However, after Splinter Twin got banned, Kiki-Jiki has stepped into a very similar role, most notably in Kiki Core decks, which use Court of Calling and other creature tutors to find both Kiki-Jiki and the other combo pieces. The deck isn't really as dominant as Splinter Twin was, but it is certainly a factor in Modern. In addition to having consistent success in Modern over the years, it also had a brief moment to shine in Legacy, where it helped power the completely busted Flash Hulk deck. I've covered this combo in detail several times elsewhere, but suffice it to say the goal was to get Kiki-Jiki, a sacrifice outlet, and Karmic Guide in play. You would copy the guide with Kiki's ability, sacrifice Kiki, then reanimate it with Karmic Guide so you can use the ability again to keep making more Karmic Guides. Kiki isn't too far from finally passing Splinter Twin, since he's still legal in Modern and still putting up points. At number 4, I once again have 2 cards, the Scarab God and God Pharaoh's Gift. These 2 cards both let you clone something from the graveyard by exiling it and putting a 4/4 zombie copy of it into play. They were in Standard at the same time, and while they weren't actually played together a ton, the similarity of the effect was enough for me to put them together here. As I've already mentioned in the video, the Scarab God was one of the more dominant cards around while it was in Standard, where it was a very powerful win condition for control decks. They could kill and counter creatures all game long, and then play Scarab God and start turning those same creatures into 4/4 zombies, and then run away with the game. It also has 1 point that came in a Modern Grixis control deck, and more recently it's found success in Pioneer Fires of Invention. Meanwhile, God Pharaoh's Gift's success has been more limited, only gaining points in an eponymous Standard deck that specialized in milling itself a bunch to provide lots of fuel for the gift. The Scarab God is likely to gain more points in the future, while God Pharaoh's Gift is not. At number 3, it is Fable of the Mirror Breaker, by far the newest card on the list, so new that it's still in Standard right now. It's from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it makes reference to the Kiki-Jiki we already saw on this list. It probably doesn't surprise you that it's here if you've been playing Magic at all over the last year or so, as it is broken into every single constructed format. This powerful creature saga gives you a massive amount of value for the investment. It immediately gives you a 2/2 creature token that can make a treasure when it taps. Then it lets you discard up to 2 cards to draw up to 2 cards, and then it transforms into Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, a 2/2 creature that allows you to pay 1 and tap it to make a temporary hasty clone of a creature you control. So, yeah, you pay 3 mana here, you get 2 2/2s with powerful abilities, and you get to filter through your deck. They did make sure you had to pay mana for the Reflections ability, which limits its ability to do silly combos like the original Kiki-Jiki, but that's fine because this card's really just all about the absurd value it gives you for the cost. It's already seen play in Standard, Historic, Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, and even Vintage, though it only has a single point there. If things continue like this, the Fable is likely to be the number 1 card on the list in the end. At number 2, it is Phyrexian Metamorph. This is the first clone that we can say is strictly better than the original. You can pay 3 generic and a blue for it, just like the old school clone, but it can also copy artifacts. On top of that, it also uses Phyrexian mana, which means you can actually just pay 3 generic and 2 life to cast it. This means that any deck that wants to cast this can. So yeah, it's easier to cast and it can copy more than just creatures. The Metamorph has seen play in just about every format it's been legal in. In Standard and Modern, it was pretty nice in Birthing Pod decks, as sometimes tutoring up a clone of your best creature, or your opponent's best creature, is your best move. It could also clone the pod itself when it needed to. It also saw play in other Standard decks as well, like Delver. In Legacy, it's been played in Eldrazi aggro and Painter combo, and in Vintage, it's played in the artifact-focused Ravager Shops deck. It's going to keep on gaining points going forward. And at number 1, it is Phantasmal Image, the cheapest clone of them all. It costs half the mana of the original while retaining the same ability to enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Paying 2 mana makes it a heck of a lot easier to get a nice return on your investment. It does come with a downside that balances things a bit, since if it gets targeted by anything, it gets sacrificed. The image has been used the most by various tribal decks over the years, because it can count as additional copies of important lords. It is preferred over some of the other clones we've seen because it costs so much less mana. In Standard, it was copying Lord of the Unreal and Illusion decks, which was pretty sweet because it meant both your lords would have hexproof. It's been used to copy various Merfolk lords in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it's done the same sort of thing for Modern Humans and Modern Spirits. In those decks, many of the creatures also have powerful enter the battlefield abilities, and when this comes into play as a copy of one of them, you get those triggers. The image is going to keep gaining points going forward, but it's doing so at a much slower rate than Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which makes me think the saga will eventually reign supreme on this list. So, those are the 10 clones that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in copying your creatures, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.